What's going on, everybody, and welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to take you through a charcoal melt. Now I'm going to be breaking these videos up into parts. Part one, the melt. Part two, forging the ingot on the hammer, which is going to be exciting. And I will not be releasing these parts in a timely fashion. I can tell you that right now because of life. So I know I've done melt videos in the past, but never with charcoal. So I actually have only done one charcoal melt that was actually pretty successful. So there are some things I do want to talk about before I bring it down here to everything that's going to go into the crucible and how I'm going to stack this crucible. Okay, so why charcoal over pig iron? Well, one, it's more historically accurate. Now, I'm not really trying to be 100% historically accurate because really nothing I'm doing in my process is how they made Wootz historically. The crucibles I'm using, the materials I'm using, none of that is close to how they made Wootz historically. But I do believe the closer that you can get to historical accuracy, the better results. Not so much in material, kind of, but how you forge it. There's a lot of variables there. So I don't want to get down these roads because there's roads that I can go down that you could just argue and talk about for days. So that's one reason. Also, I feel like it's a cleaner source. Pig iron, especially some of the stuff I have, is very high in silicon, and that's horrible. That is just a horrible element in Wootz. You can pick it up in the glass. You can pick it up in your crucibles. So it's like, why have extra silicon? You know what I mean? And some of the pig iron I have is over 0.1% silicon, and it's just a nasty element in Wootz. So that's another reason I'm kind of going towards charcoal. Now, there are impurities in charcoal. That's why I think it's important, if you're going to use charcoal, that you get a good source. And I'm using this stuff, which I feel like is pretty good. So I've done one melt of this. This ingot came out great. Structure looks great. Carbon uptake, great. But that's the downside of using charcoal, is you really don't know what's in it. So and you really don't know the carbon content. It's all kind of a guess. So I calculate this at 80% charcoal. I'm not going to get into the equations of making all this. It's really simple. I don't mind helping people out. If you want to message me on Instagram or something, I can take you through the equations, but I'm not going to get into that. So that's kind of the reason I'm taking the step towards using charcoal. I still have a lot of experimentation to do. I haven't got anything analyzed at this point. I've had a lot of steel analyzed using pig iron, and now I'm taking this route just to do things differently. So something else I'm doing differently with this chemistry over previous chemistries is I'm using vanadium, ferrovanadium. I do think that if you're going to use, for your alloying content, I do think that ferroalloys are the best source to use, either in powder form or solid form like this. Lump form is what the correct term would be. But now, for anybody that says you have to have vanadium or vanadium is better, this does not understand what the alloying elements or carbide forming elements are doing. It's that simple. You do not need vanadium. That's not the secret behind Wootz, okay? Any strong carbide forming elements will do. So anybody who says that just doesn't really understand what they're doing. They're essentially just your seed point. And I'm not going to get into all of that metallurgy because really all we have is theories. I have a theory and what I think, that is primarily based on what other smiths have told me, which I completely agree with what their theories are. I'm not going to give any of that away, but I just want to make that very clear. So now I'm going to take it down here, show you everything and how I'm going to stack this charge. Stay tuned. Okay, so it looks like everything's in camera view here. Have my iron flake, the phosphorus powder, glass, carbon source, which is charcoal, and carbide former. So one thing I do is I use a little kitchen scale in grams to weigh out all my heavier material. And I have another one I use to double check. And then for the smaller gram measurements, I use one of these jeweler scales, which is actually pretty accurate, surprisingly. You can get these off of Amazon. And since I'm only using 1.8 grams of ferrovanadium, those little jeweler scales come in handy. So one thing I do with the charcoal, since it comes in these little blocks like this that are actually pretty compact and hard, is I'll put them in a little baggie and then I'll break them up with the hammer. And then once they're slightly broken up, I put them in a little NutriBullet. I bought this just for grinding charcoal. So you don't want to make your protein shake in this, or maybe you do. So this actually works really great. Gets it into a nice fine powder. And then I put it in here. So this is not coffee, trust me. Should probably label this. But yeah, it works really good. So I have everything measured out. This is going to be a 2,400 gram ingot. So I've got 2,050 grams of iron flake, 300 grams of iron phosphorus powder, and 50 grams of charcoal. So that'll make a 2,400 gram ingot. And plus the 1.8 grams of ferrovanadium. Now, one thing I do, and something I've been doing recently, and probably the last 15 melts, is I actually weigh my glass. I use the exact same amount of glass every time. So roughly about 200 grams, plus or minus isn't gonna hurt anything, but don't want too much green glass. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you how I stack the crucible. So first off, I like to put a little iron in. Doesn't need to be too much. You know, I'll put a little powder, iron powder in, you know, a little bit more iron, a little bit more powder. Doesn't really matter. I mean, it kind of matters, but I like my charcoal to be probably like medium in the crucible. So like that. And then I'll put the charcoal in. Give me a second here. Whew, that stuff is flaky. And you really want to be kind of accurate and precise with your charcoal, because even just a gram off really change the carbon, really can change, the carbon content. So then I'll just dump my ferroalloys, and then the rest iron. And then the glass. And that's it. And as John Norwood would say, nothing to it really. So this right here will make a 2,400 gram ingot. And I'll go ahead and cap it and then seal it with some green patch. And next I'm gonna go over to the furnace and give you guys a rundown on my new furnace. Okay, so this is a new furnace design, furnace body and the burner. Trash can furnace, as I like to call it, or furnace to grouch. But I did end up I was using this before, but I ended up relining it. And it's essentially 6 inches of kail wool, and then about 1.5 inches of refractory in the chamber and 2 inches on top. Something I did different too was I casted this whole area. You can kind of see where the lid sits. And before, I only cast it out to the lid. So I like this a little better. The very bottom of the trash can is just a bunch of perlite I used and to kind of raise the floor up. Then I just put a bunch of insulation above the perlite, and then some white brick, K26 fire brick. And then I wrapped the insulation around that, and then casted the floor, and then casted the chamber. And chamber is only about 8 inches in circumference, which is just the size of one of those concrete tubes you can buy at Home Depot or Lowe's, and about 2 inches of refractory here. And something I'm doing different now is I'm using a pedestal. So this works great. It's just the bottom of an old crucible. Just cut that. Works great for a pedestal. And got to use a longer thermal couple. So got to be gentle with this. But I think this is about, I don't know, maybe like a 12-inch, 11.5-inch S-type thermal couple. So obviously, as the more insulation you get and the wider your furnace is, the longer the thermal couple you're going to need. So with the burner, it's just a bounce house blower and just a bunch of piping. Pretty simple here. And the burner tip is casted into the body. I did have a failure kind of go on here, so I just put a bunch of wool there, and I did cast around that. But yeah, pretty simple. I just leave that loose, or I'll tighten it up a little, and then when I get close to shutting this thing down, I'll loosen it up, pull the burner out, and then plug that. Yeah, so pretty simple burner design, just a gate valve, and yeah, that's really it. So let's get this crucible in there and start melting. Okay, so charge is in the chamber, and we're ready to light this thing off. So stay tuned. Okay, well, she's shut down and just gonna sit here and cool overnight. Okay, so I'm home from work and the furnace has been sitting like this since last night. I think I pulled it into my garage about 7 o'clock in the evening, but I shut this melt down at about 1:30 p.m. So that's pretty crazy that it's still 130 something degrees. But even when I stick my hand in here, it's still relatively warm. So let's go ahead and see what we got. Okay, so this is still significantly hot. I had to put gloves on. There we are out of the, oops. There we are out of the furnace. So let's go ahead and pop the top and look at the ingot. Stay tuned. Looks pretty good. It's got some glass up here, got to get off of here. So I will go ahead, spark test this and look at it under the microscope. So stay tuned. All right, so as I stated in the beginning of the video, the carbon content of charcoal isn't precise. There's not a precise number like there is with pig iron. So there is that variable of unknown. And I calculated at 80%. So that's why I want to look at the structure of this ingot, you know, because there are signs that are indicative of carbon content in the right range. So I've made enough ingots at this point that I don't even need to do that. But now that I'm using charcoal, I definitely want to, you know, look at some structures to make sure, you know, my process is consistent. So there's things that I look for in these structures that tell me right away. One is grain boundary carbide and needle-like carbides, also known as Wittgenstein carbide. So seeing those right away tell me if I'm in the right carbon range. So I've seen enough of my ingots around 1.5, 1.6% carbon, and they all look the same, especially if solidification is around the same time. But there are a lot of variables to this. There's a lot of different variables, you know. Chemistry can change a lot. The rate of solidification can change things. But with my process and what I'm doing, I see these structures consistently, even with slight changes in chemistry, not drastic changes, but just slight changes. So during cooling, what's happening is, and I'll go into what you're looking at on the ingot structure. Now, at first, I drew this excellent picture here. These little tree-looking things are like your dendrite crystals. You know, they solidify first. And I did show a better picture of this in the Viking Challenge build, but I just want to give a very brief explanation of what's happening. I don't want to go very deep into this. But essentially, as your iron crystals start to form, you have liquid still here. And in the liquid is where all your carbon's at and your CFEs. Now, this is where there's a lot of variables and things can change, but for my chemistry, essentially what's happening is in the IDRs here, this is the interdendritic regions, the carbon's here. Now, as your ingot starts to cool and solidify, that carbon's getting kicked out of these areas. As the grains are growing, and these grains are growing large, the grains are just massive, because you can see, I mean, with your naked eye, you can see the structure of this ingot. You don't even need a microscope. But as those grains grow, carbon starts to diffuse out of these IDRs, and it goes to the grain boundaries first. So as, I'll show you this on the iron carbon phase diagram here. I got this from the International Wootz Society. These are really great. But as your ingot starts to cool from liquid down to ACM, sorry, can't really, it's hard to look here. But as you start to cool from liquid down to ACM, carbon diffusion here is rapid. It's just your primary carbides are forming. They're gonna diffuse out to the grain boundaries. And as you come down even below ACM, there's still carbon migration happening. You're still having, you know, carbon precipitate inside the grains, you know, and that's where you see those needle-like carbides. They're no longer going to precipitate on the grain boundary. They will precipitate inside the grain as needles. So that's why I look at the structures right away, because that tells me I'm in the right carbon range. So now looking at the structure again, you erase this. The grains are basically like you'll see. So let's say here's kind of the ingot, and I have a window etched in here, right? Excellent art. You'll see these kind of like lines, you know, they're kind of very chaotic and like abstract, right? Well, those are your grain boundaries. The lines are the grain boundaries. So that just gives you an idea how big these grains are. And you know, when you look at them under microscope, you really see all the coarse carbides on them. You can really see them. And then inside the grain, you get these needles, you know, but you can also see some kind of grid pattern too of somewhat of a dendritic structure. So when you're looking at that structure under the microscope and you see the, this is just looking at it with your naked eye. So under the microscope, right, when you see these really coarse, like you'll see these coarse like lines, you know what I mean? They go like this, and they've got really coarse white. That's carbide. That's all grain boundary carbide, GBC, okay? And then you'll see the lines. That's the Widmanstatten. Okay, that's what I want to see. That's how I know carbon content is in the right range. Even spark testing it, I knew right away. I was like, okay, we're good, because I can tell just by sparking that this very, very burst of sparks tells me too, you know, because like I said, I've made enough ingots and I've seen enough of this that I know that I'm in the right range. So as soon as I saw that, I knew right away, okay, good, we got success. So I just figured I'd share that with you in case you had any questions and you were wondering, you know, how do you know that I'm in the right carbon range? Well, that's why. So I am inserting this later on before I filmed everything else, but a lot of things have happened. So part 2 probably be a while till I get back to forging, because right now I'm working on my truck. Had an issue with the engine, so I've got it all tore down, and I've almost got it all back together and running again. So that's kind of taken up a lot of my time. But other than that, that's why I look at the structures. So another thing I wanted to add in here is that now that I got my hammer here, and it's going to be here for the winter time, next summer I'm going to get it out to the shed. But I also got an Apollo forge, so I will be using that next to my hammer to forge this ingot. I did receive everything in the mail, and I'm excited to get that set up and start using that. So that's kind of going to be my garage forge. All right, so overall, this is actually a really good result. I'm really happy with this. So recently I've been drastically trying to reduce my melt temperatures and find the kind of the perfect time, I guess. I think I've been running my melts a little too long, and I think I can get away with a lot shorter melts, which will hopefully reduce silicon content. But yeah, I'm really happy with this. Everything looks good. So that's going to conclude this video, and in part 2 I will roast this ingot and then we'll forge it. So stay tuned. I appreciate you watching, and take care.